Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. It's the second of our Goa School talks today, which we are very excited about because what we try and do is talk about topics that concern all of us and use it as a way to learn and to connect with each other. And we do this on a monthly basis. Today we have Tom Kuhlman with us, who is a Dutch economist. And he's very popular with the Goa School because he's also been a mentor before. And we've loved his talk. In fact, many of the fellows repeatedly made references to the things that you said afterwards in discussion, which is which is the best marker of knowing that the talk went well. So thank you for that, Tom, and we look forward to today. I'll just introduce the topic a little bit. We advertise it as sort of environment versus development, but Tom will tell us a little bit more. The reason we wanted to put this up for everyone was, the environment is everything, right? It's the planet, it's the atmosphere, it's lakes, rivers, forests. It's everything that man and women depend on to exist and to survive, right? Development, on the other hand, is all the things that we do in the sort of political, social, and economic sphere to attain a better quality of life. And these two things are sometimes at odds with each other. And I guess the development part comes intrinsically to us. We all sort of have an innate view of what we need to become better and sort of more useful humans and versions of ourselves. The environment, however, is something that I guess modern life has pulled us away from more and more. We probably need to sort of just sharpen the way we look at it and what our attitude towards the environment ought to be. And this is where I'll now hand over the baton to Tom, because Tom, I guess, has prepared a really useful set of inputs for us to reflect on in today's meeting. So welcome, Tom, and thank you.
Thank you, Madhuri. Let me try to. Am I audible? Can people hear me nicely?
Yes.
Yeah, good. I'm going to try and share my screen because I've prepared a little PowerPoint. So let us see if it can work.
We see your screen.
Yes, very good. All right, then let's go ahead. We all know that the environment is in crisis. We read this in the newspaper and we see it in the media every day. We are suffering from climate change. We're suffering from loss of biodiversity. We are worried about land degradation, different types of land degradation. We are worried about pollution, air pollution, water pollution, pollution of soils. There seems to be no end to the ringing of alarm bells. There is also no shortage of prescriptions on what we should do. Use less energy, change to other forms of energy, create more nature reserves and protect them better, plant trees, use water more efficiently, protect soils from erosion. In rich countries, we are encouraged to eat less meat and perhaps even stop economic growth altogether. Poor countries are advised to reduce or even stop population growth. But there are grave doubts as to whether these prescriptions will be followed and whether they will be enough to prevent disaster. My purpose in this talk is not to discuss the merits of these prescriptions or the need for implementing them. Rather, I want to take a step back with you and to reflect on the place of humanity in the world and on our attitudes to our environment and to nature. To reflect on who we are, you might say. This can help us, I hope, to make the necessary choices for our actions. Now, a common way to go about such a reflection is to take someone else's view and then attack it. And that is precisely what I will do today. We often talk about the planet and that it is in danger because of our actions. Here you see a picture that was taken by an early astronaut in 1968. What I wanted to say is that the Earth has existed for billions of years. And during that time, life on our planet has undergone several mass extinctions. Sometimes 90% of existing species were wiped out. After each of these events, it took millions of years for biodiversity to recover. But yet, recovery did. And each time, life reached a higher level of biodiversity than before. And a higher level, I also mean more complexity. Competition between different life forms means that each species, in order to survive, over time develops more sophisticated mechanisms. The evolution of our own human brain is perhaps the best example. For all we know, it may be the most highly organized form of matter in the entire universe. So this is what I'm trying to do, to reflect on who we are and our place in the history of the world. There is no reason to think that we are the end product of evolution, or that our species will last forever. Someday another mass extinction will come, and we shall go the way of the dinosaurs. And that will not be the end of life, and certainly not the end of the planet. The Earth has seen a lot more climate change than what is happening today. It has been much hotter than now, at some point in history, and also much colder. The damage that we are doing to our environment is to the Earth no more than a minor skin rash, and a temporary one to boot. We do not need to worry about the Earth. What we do need to worry about is ourselves and the next few generations. Will we be able to produce enough food and energy to sustain our lives and those of our children? Are there enough resources for the poor to lift themselves out of poverty? Will we be able to maintain an acceptable standard of living? These, to me, are the real questions. But you will ask, what about nature? Do we have the right to exterminate other species, as we are doing at present? Is that not an enormous loss? Are we not responsible for our environment? To answer that question, my suggestion is to look inside ourselves. We must ask why we should want to protect species or ecosystems, even if we do not need them as a source of food or raw materials. I think the answer is that we value them for their beauty, for scientific interest, or because we think they may one day be useful. Man does not live by bread alone, as the Bible says. We have spiritual needs too, and we are saddened by the loss of something valuable, particularly if it has existed for a long time. Then we consider it part of our heritage. This is why it was so sad when the Buddhist statues at Bamiyan in Afghanistan were destroyed by the Taliban, and very sad when indigenous animals in Australia became extinct after the white man landed. My point is that man is the measure of all things, something first said by the ancient Greek philosopher Protagoras. Well, today we should say something like humankind is the measure of all things, but that is how he said it. When we feel, for instance, that an animal should not be mistreated or used for food, it is our ethical norm that is at stake, not the norm of the animal. In my country, there is talk of giving animals legal rights. In New Zealand, some rivers have been given rights as legal persons. In my view, this is a mistake. Animals and rivers cannot defend their rights in court. Someone has to speak on their behalf. Who is that? And what right does she or he have to speak for the entity concerned? It is only us humans who can decide what such rights should be and how they can be protected. So we can make laws to prevent people from polluting a river, diverting it, or taking excessive amounts of sand from the riverbed. I fail to see how making a river a legal person with rights improves that situation. There is another point. Rights cannot come without obligations. If you have the freedom to express your opinion, that gives me an obligation, namely to tolerate that expression. My freedom to stretch my arm ends where it touches your face. But what are the obligations of a river? Can we punish it when it dries up or when it floods? Can we take a horse to court for kicking us? So what I propose is a bit of modesty. Our impact on the environment is limited in the overall scheme of things. The damage we do is mostly detrimental to ourselves. It is our norms that govern our behavior towards the environment, not some universal law that we ought to follow. Therefore, I plead for a practical approach towards environmental conservation, informed by an understanding of who we are, as well as an understanding of what is going on in our environment. This is not to say that we should not protect the environment, but we should be aware that we do it for ourselves. That, in essence, is what is meant by sustainability, a word that we hear a lot when there is talk of environmental conservation. What does it mean? To me, it means the ability to continue for the foreseeable future. And that points to another problem. How much can we foresee? The natural resources we use today may not be the same in the future. Let me give you an example. In Britain, around the year 1600, people were very worried about forests. A lot of trees were being cut to make charcoal for things like making iron, brewing beer, and making bricks. Also, a lot of trees were being cut to build ships. Then they discovered a substitute, coke, not cocaine or Coca-Cola, but a substance that you can make from coal. So the forest was no longer needed for fuel. And ships from the 19th century started to be built from steel instead of from wood. Since then, the forest cover in Britain has increased rather than diminished. In my own country, in the Netherlands, a lot of low-lying land was lost in the Middle Ages by digging up the soil for peat, which was used as fuel. As a result, the land was flooded, and this led to lower food production. However, today, these lakes, which are situated near big cities, are highly valued for recreation, swimming, sailing, etc. The point that I want to make is, we may think that a resource is endangered, but in the long run it turns out that it is no longer needed, and there may be other uses for the same land. Do I still have time, Madhuri?
Sure. How much?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I am over half.
Okay.
But you can stop me at any time, or when it is time for when the 40 minutes are up, I'll have a look at that.
Well, yeah, maybe Paloma can tell us how many minutes we have.
So we've just completed 25 minutes. So, sorry, 30 minutes. So you have another 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we break and come back for questions.
Yeah. I have more examples. There is already a major movement going on today of using sustainable energy, such as dams, wind power, solar energy, instead of fossil fuels. Use of these fuels, of fossil fuels, is likely to diminish over the course of this century, although perhaps too late to stop global warming. But that the world's stock of fossil fuels will be exhausted someday now looks unlikely. There will always be coal and oil and gas. A major source of concern in agriculture is that ever more land is used not to grow crops for feeding humans, but to grow feed for livestock and to convert tropical forest into pasture land. This could lead to a food crisis. However, it is already possible to produce meat in the laboratory from animal cells without the need to breed, to raise, and to kill large numbers of animals. Note this, I am not talking of meat substitutes, such as imitation meat from soybeans. No, it is real meat. In Singapore, such poultry meat is already on the market, although generally the production cost is still too high to replace the conventional kind. The long-term availability of fresh water is another problem, particularly in agriculture. However, water can be recycled, or seawater can be converted into fresh water. Perhaps in the more distant future, we shall not need agriculture at all anymore, instead harvest algae from the sea. All of these technological solutions also bring problems of their own, such as high cost or environmental problems. In the case of dams, for instance, I think the Narmada Valley in India is a case in point. Industrialization has brought air and water pollution, but also these problems are not insoluble. My point is that humanity will always have environmental problems, but that has not stopped development. And my other point is that some problems are more intractable than others. Let me elaborate on that a little. What you may have understood from what I have said is that some natural resources can be substituted, can be replaced by others through technological development. Other resources can be recycled. Animal manure is a splendid example. And the same is even true for human waste. That is what the Japanese have traditionally used, because they did not have much livestock in the old days. Recycling too can be increased through technological innovation. We often picture development as being in conflict with nature and with the environment, but in some ways development can actually help to diminish our dependence on the supply of limited natural resources. Sure, the protection of nature and the environment costs money, but economic growth can make that money available. And yet, there is still cause for concern, even great concern, whether our species can survive in the longer term, say for the next 1,000 years, especially if we consider how much poverty there still is. Can the Earth provide for a still growing population and at a better standard of living for the poor than today? I do not know the answer to that, but I do know the biggest risks: biodiversity loss and climate change. The diversity of life, the total pool of genes that exist on Earth, is one of the most important resources we have. All of our crops and livestock species and most of our medicines are derived from natural organisms. Every species that becomes extinct may have possessed genetic resources that might one day have been of value to us, but that are lost, probably forever. Moreover, all life forms within a particular area are linked to each other in the form of ecosystems. Remove one of those links, say the Asian tiger or the whales in the oceans, and no one knows what the consequences for the ecosystem as a whole will be. The only thing we can be sure of is that the system will become poorer. If we pass some tipping point, it may collapse. And what we lose is not only economic resources in the strict sense. As I said before, man does not live by bread alone. All this natural wealth also provides beauty, spiritual value, and scientific knowledge. If it is destroyed, our descendants will not benefit from it. I think ecosystems and biodiversity are basically irreplaceable. Much has already been lost, but much also still exists for our benefit if we find suitable ways to protect it. During our lives and those of our children and grandchildren, then climate change is a very big problem. We now know for sure that it is our human activities that have significantly changed the climate on Earth over the last 150 or 200 years. The effects were predicted by scientists, but are now clear for all to see. Since we humans have caused this, it is theoretically also possible to do something about it. But in practice, it has turned out to be far from easy. The cost of measures to reduce climate change is high, and there is much disagreement on how these costs should be divided. Rich countries have caused most climate change in the past, and still do so today, while poor countries have contributed much less, but are suffering the consequences just as much as the rich ones, and possibly even more. Undoubtedly, our efforts to combat climate change will accelerate in the next few decades, but whether it will be enough is highly doubtful. So, in my view, we should probably focus on these two issues regarding our natural environment. They are the most serious and the most difficult to solve. The next question is, who should take the necessary action? Most people would say the government. They are, after all, there to look after our common interest. Especially in the West, this is the view. However, that view presupposes that the government is a force for the good. We all know that this is a risky assumption. The government consists of people, and some of these people look after their own interests rather than those of the nation. Some are guided by the interests of big business. Some are incompetent. Some governments are downright evil. Then there are companies, large and small. These two consist of people making the decisions. We often picture them as driven by greed, but business managers may also take a long-term view and take public interest into account. The problem is that they are always limited in how much public good they can do, because the company can only exist as long as it is profitable, and it has to compete with others. We as individuals can do something. Those of us who have the good fortune to live in a democracy can vote bad politicians out and good ones in, always hoping that we know who they are. Through our own behavior as consumers and citizens, we can make a difference, trying to make the right choices. Finally, there is the role of what we call civil society, the voluntary organizations set up by citizens at many levels, from village groups to international NGOs. To me, these are our biggest hope. They can influence governments, at least in countries that have some degree of civic freedom, encourage citizens, and shame businesses into more responsible behavior. Whether it will all be enough, we do not know, but we can only try our best. Hope is a virtue too. Thank you for the attention.
Wow, thank you, Tom. That's pretty amazing. And you covered a really vast sort of swathe of topics. And in fact, when you started by saying that to the earth, the activities of human beings are no more than a skin rash, I was slightly worried because I was like, oh no, which way is this talk going to go? But I was happy to see that you came all the way down to talking about how both biodiversity and climate change would be the most irreparable losses for us. So I've got a lot of questions. I will start with the first one that comes from Shahrukh.
Sorry, Madhuri, actually, can we restart? Because like in 3 minutes, we have 3 minutes.
I'm aware.
Okay.
So we'll take the first one and you'll have to stop recording, otherwise we lose it, right? So we'll take the first one from Shahrukh, and for the rest, we'll have to click back to come back on because we have a 40-minute free version of Zoom. So Shahrukh's first question is, what about political wars? And do these not affect the climate? And I guess he's got Ukraine and other things on his mind. So Tom, would you like to take that question in about 2 minutes and then we can come back?
Sure. Of course, the wars also affect climate. After all, a lot of resources are being used. The good thing about wars is that they usually have a restricted duration. That is why today in Europe, when we are wondering what to do about our energy problems, there are tendencies to start using coal again, which is in the long run bad, but in the short term is the only thing we can do. I do not know for sure, but I think the effect of wars on the climate would be limited because of the short duration. But during when war is going on, the effect on climate is big and on the environment too.
So you mean limited, Tom, in terms of the history of the Earth and the planet, but possibly the effects of that war will be, for a whole generation or more, which is usually the case, especially. Okay, I'm back, and thank you. So the recording's on. Right, so I'm afraid I don't know. I'm going to start with the questions that came up while you were talking, Tom. And I'm afraid I don't know exactly who asked this one. It says, has led to the crisis we face? Can I repeat that? The question is, has development led to the environmental crisis that we face today?
I think the answer has to be a resounding yes.
Yeah, okay. And then maybe what I can do is I can cycle through some 2 or 3 of the questions and you can sort of answer them together. Seher asks, what are some examples of things that countries are doing or should do, such as Sweden, that are improving the crisis? Another question is one of the solutions to move towards a more circular economy? And another question is, what is your opinion on the advocacy and activist movements that are drawing more attention to the climate crisis, as opposed to the academic and scientific community? So those were the three questions, and maybe you can point your remarks in that direction.
Okay, let me see. Can I also see the questions in the chat?
You could have, because
yes,
yeah,
I can see them. Yes.
Oh, thanks, Maitri. Yeah.
Well, as to the first question, what countries can do, there I think, you know, rich countries have the advantage because they have bigger resources that and they can make more sacrifices to help the environment than poor countries are able to do. And yes, the circular economy, that is definitely a very important one. In the talk that I gave, I also alluded to recycling as one of the things we can do. One example is, for instance, phosphate. You know, phosphate is a limited resource and it is used as fertilizer. And the fear is that within the next 100 years, maybe less, maybe more, it will be completely exhausted. So then, but since the resource itself is always recycled, it's just that we take it from phosphate mines, take it to our fields, then we use it, and some of the phosphorus ends up in our bodies, and that means eventually it is also expelled as waste, and in the end it all ends up in the oceans. But that means, in principle, it is possible to recycle it, to capture it, maybe through sewage, for instance. It can be caught, and for many resources, this will be the solution, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, and as for activists as opposed to academics, I think they both have their role to play, because researchers are the ones who help us to gain the knowledge that is needed, and then, but to put this knowledge into good use, to influence policies or to get the right policies going, I think that is where activist groups, NGOs, etc., the civil society, as I called it, has a very important role to play.
Right. So we'll open it up now for people who'd like to make comments and to have a discussion with Tom. So I guess you can just, I think, is there a raised hand? No, there isn't. Okay, but maybe you can just sort of raise your hand visually and we can see.
Under reactions, there is a raise hand also.
Right, so you can also do it digitally under reactions. So I see right away, of course, that Maitri has a question. So go, Maitri.
Hi, I'm actually studying climate change and development right now. I'm in my first semester, and I was, and I'm like an older student. I'm not in my 20s. I'm in my 40s. So when I started reading the material, and I'm studying at SOAS, so it's left leaning quite a bit, and it's quite open to different perspectives globally, and it recognizes the global South, etc., with a lot of passion. But what stood out to me most was the fact that this is information that the scientific and the academic community has known for the last 40 years, right? Why do you think there is, and now you have young people like, your Extinction Rebellion and, all these activist movements where young people are jumping in and very passionately protesting and doing all of that. Why do you think that for the last 40 years, regular people like me actually did not know how serious the problem was. Why was there such a gap between the academic research reaching civil society, so to speak, because whatever academic research happens should eventually reach civil society, right? A lot of the research is paid for by taxes being paid by civil society. So why was this crucial information not available or not put out to civil society? And that's something that really bugged me right in the beginning. And since I have you, I should ask you.
Thank you. I think you have asked the $64,000 question, as they call it. For one thing, I think the scientists have been aware, they have predicted the impact of greenhouse gases on the climate for even longer than 40 years. I think 100 years ago or so, there have already been publications. One problem, I think, is that people sometimes misunderstand science. They think science is that you have knowledge and that you know exactly how things are. And often, of course, what science really is research, is trying to find out things. And knowledge gradually reaches a higher level from one generation to the next. So also in this climate change issue, there has also, as always in science, there has also been doubt. Is it really caused by humans? Is it something we can do something about? How bad is it really? And of course, in politics, there are politicians who like to listen to these, let us say, scientists who have another story. And it is only, there is this IPCC, right? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is very, how do you say, it enjoys a high authority. And they have, until recently, they have been careful about how firm they were about our knowledge on climate change. And they said, yes, we are not sure. It looks very likely. 90% of scientists think it is so. But just last year, they have produced a report which says it is certain. They say that there is no real reason for doubt that this is happening and that we have to do something about it. I think that is one major reason why it all seems to have, things seem to be developing much more rapidly now. I think another thing is that the effects of climate change are so visible, almost daily, isn't it? Sometimes even when I discuss with my son, he thinks that every bout of warm weather is a part of climate change. And I tell him, no, you have to look over the longer term. But yes, we do see it. We see it in Europe this very week. I think in India, it is very visible also that the climate is changing. And of course, the young people are the ones who are most worried because, let us say, a generation back when I was at their age, I could still think, yeah, probably in 50 years or so, then it will be serious, but then I'll be an old man and well, we still have time to change things. But the young people see it is happening now. In 20 years, they'll still be fairly young or middle-aged, and they'll have to cope with it. So the sense of urgency has increased very much.
But it's still not really affecting policies where it should, right? The lobbies and all still seem to be quite strong from what I gather that happened at that happens at the conferences. The lobbies are still very strong. They're not backing down.
I'm not so sure. From the way I see it, I see that things are really changing in my country, in politics. It is definitely changing, and the sense of urgency is increasing. I think it is changing.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Thank
you. You know, the British politician Winston Churchill, he once said that he was in no doubt that the government in the end would do the right thing. But only once all alternatives are exhausted, meaning that it is very possible that I think governments are now acting. Not every government, but many governments are acting. But whether it will be enough remains to be seen. I'm not optimistic.
Well, at least in the
Thank you.
Netherlands, you have Green Party, which puts the environment front and center of the political agenda. And I often
Yes.
wonder whether we'll ever have a party like that in our country. Maybe one of our fellows will establish one such party in the future. We have Rohit Kumar next, who is asking a superbly interesting question and shifting gears a bit. Rohit, would you like to put your mic on and ask the question yourself? He's also got it in the chat already, but
I have read the question.
Right. Okay, so maybe you can just answer it. And he says the future is not only about humans and nature, but there will also be artificial intelligence. And so, what do you think about the role that artificial intelligence has in nature and the environment?
This question makes it very difficult for me to answer, Rohit, because I have never thought about this question before. So I really do not know. I really do not know. Maybe you yourself can give a view on what you thought.
Rohit? You'll have to unmute yourself. You have to put your mic on because we can't hear you. I don't know if you...
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Hi, Rohit.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, that was an amazing question.
So the thing is, the human concern is that we have the burden of thinking about nature and other animals. But after a few years, maybe 50 years, there must be another, the intelligence, artificial intelligence. They may also concern about the future of their self and the environment and the earth they are living. So what do you think about that? There will be the fight between the thought of existence.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what can be out there. What the future will bring in terms of artificial intelligence. Of there is talk of robots who may one day make their own decisions. To me, the intelligence has to do with no. Let me put it this way: you cannot have intelligence without emotion. You can have intelligence, but there must be somebody else who has emotions, because emotions dictate what we want to do. Emotions dictate what we find valuable. And if you want to make any decision, you have to first feed in your emotions. What do you want? What do you...
So I recently saw a video of, Sophia, the humanoid.
Meeting is being recorded.
So hello?
Yes, I hear you.
So there is an interview of a humanoid named Sophia in Saudi or maybe in Dubai. So somebody asked her about did she feel anything? Did she have emotions and feelings? So she said that she had some feelings. She can she can feel the.
Yeah, I must admit, Rohit, that this is new to me.
Meeting is being recorded.
So I would say to me it is really uncharted terrain.
Well, I mean, I guess it's not impossible to imagine that, robots or artificial intelligence or bots or humanoids or whatever they are, they will probably, if they do come to be, they can both harm and sort of protect the environment. I mean, at the end of the day, it's humans who lead the development of artificial intelligence.
But as Rohit says, perhaps.
Meeting is being recorded.
Okay, I'm sorry that the recording is coming and going. This is basically because I think Kuhlman's connection is unstable. So let me see if I can do it. In any case, more questions, anyone? Or discussion?
No, I have a thought. I mean, sorry I joined late, so I really I'm not sure about what has been discussed.